When finally the guns fell silent across the Western Front on the 11th of November 1918, much of Europe was left in ruins. Years of warfare had shattered towns and villages and left millions dead. But what of the living? Amongst that number were millions more prisoners, who themselves had endured extraordinary hardships. And despite peace now reigning, tragically, not all would return home. In this video, using the latest technology and a remarkable unseen wartime collection, we'll follow a little known but incredible story of one young man and a legacy which has endured for over 100 years. Elphinstone Chamberlain in many ways epitomised his generation of courageous young men. Born in the city of Birmingham in 1897 to a large working class family, Elfie, as he was affectionately known to his 3 brothers and 3 sisters, had made the move along with his family before the war to the emerging new town of Letchworth Garden City. Built on unusual ideals of mixing the best of town and country, it had attracted families from all over Britain hoping to escape the hardships of post-Victorian city life. Taking up an apprenticeship locally around 1913 in the Phoenix Motor Works, building early motor vehicles, young Elfie's future looked bright. But like so many of his age, the storm clouds of war, which finally broke over Europe in the summer of 1914, would change everything. He, like many others, with a thirst for adventure and a love for his country, would walk down this very street on the 4th of September 1914 to reach the town recruitment station and, lying about his age, being 2 months short of his 17th birthday, would enlist underage in the British Army, eventually joining the 10th Battalion Essex Regiment. Official records tell us that Elfie was a drummer within A Company, who, whilst on the march, would keep up the spirits of the men and when in action would undertake the incredibly dangerous role of acting as a stretcher bearer, often braving enemy fire in no man's land to bring in wounded comrades. Before long, Elfie was in the thick of the action on the Western Front. Joining the 10th Essex in the summer of 1916, he would go on to fight in the brutal Battle of the Somme, in which his division suffered extremely heavy casualties in the 4-month-long campaign. Early the following year, Elfie's battalion would again see action in the Battle of Arras, from which he seems to have escaped unscathed. Surviving records tell us that in August, Elfie, along with his brother Harold, who was also in the army, were at home together in Letchworth for a week's well-earned leave, before returning to the front line just in time to once again go over the top in the muddy hell that was Passchendaele. Incredibly, having survived the 2 bloodiest British battles in the entire First World War without a scratch, Elfie seemed to be living a charmed life. Early in 1918, he again found himself thrown into the fray, this time defending against the massive German Spring Offensive, which broke open the Western Front in March. That drive, the last major German effort to win the war on the Western Front, was by June, with the help of men like Elfie Chamberlain, held just here outside the city of Amiens. It was now, finally, the turn for the Allies to make their own advance, one which would ultimately lead to victory on the battlefield. It was here on the 8th of August in the British sector of the line outside Amiens that the Great Push, known today as the 100 Days Offensive, would begin. Using tanks, aircraft, advanced infantry tactics and enormous artillery bombardments, the Allies smashed open the Western Front and began an advance which would only end on the morning of the 11th of November 1918. Amongst the millions of men to play their part was Elphinstone Chamberlain, now a 20-year-old seasoned soldier. By the 20th of September, and despite heavy losses, the Allies had pushed the Germans back all the way to the formidable Hindenburg Line, their last major defensive bastion on the Western Front. The following day, right here to the northeast of the village of Ronsoy, Chamberlain and the 10th Essex were once again ready to go into action. Turning now to the battalion's war diary, which exactly plots the unit's movements on the battlefield, and by overlaying this historic trench map of the time onto the modern satellite image, accurately placed by matching road junctions, turns and geographical features common to both, we can get an extremely accurate account of events on that day. To do that though, we first need to understand how a trench map, which included plotting trenches, barbed wire entanglements, gun emplacements and other key features, worked. The entire area on each trench map was first divided into large rectangles, identified by a capital letter. Each of these squares was then subdivided into 36 smaller numbered squares, with every square representing an area of ground measuring 1,000 by 1,000 yards. These numbered squares were further subdivided again into 4 quadrants: A in the top left, B in the top right, C bottom left, and D the bottom right, with each one measuring 500 by 500 yards. Inside these smaller squares were a series of 10 graduated marks running from the bottom left of the square, the process being that the first number of a coordinate was the distance along the base from the left, and the second the distance up the square. Thus an area could be divided into a number of smaller squares just 5 yards across. So, for example, this trench junction in the area known as Yak Post, just behind the British lines on the 21st of September, was to be found at coordinates F10, D20, 85, accurate to just 5 yards. So turning now to the battalion war diary for that date, and knowing that Elfie Chamberlain was advancing with A Company, we can recreate those movements across the battlefield. Companies were to form up as follows: A Company on the left from F10 B80 15 to F10 D80 70, C Company on right from F10 D80 70 to F10 D80 25, B Company 200 yards in the rear of A Company, and D Company 200 yards in the rear of C Company. At 0 hour, A and C companies were to advance and capture a line through the east edge of Fleecehall Post and Egg Post. B and D companies were then to leapfrog A and C companies and capture the line through Tino Support, Lion Trench and Knoll Trench. 7 tanks were to assist in the attack. Battalion headquarters moved off at 12 midnight and the battle headquarters were established at Yak Post. At 1 am, companies commenced to move to their forming up positions. At 3:30 am, attacking companies had formed up and dug themselves in. The barrage opened at 5:40 am and companies advanced at 6:07. D and C companies on the right reached Grafton Trench. On the left, A and B companies got within 200 yards of Tombois Farm. At this point, the attack was held up by machine gun fire from the 2 flanks and Tombois Farm. 4 of the tanks had been put out of action and the remaining 3 had got too far advanced of the attacking troops to be of any assistance. By 2 p.m, the battalion was back in the original front line. This somewhat dry account of the action overlooks the brutal reality on the ground. That attack, led by 19 officers and 563 men, one of many that day, had been extremely grueling. Despite the limited light, enemy machine guns firing from right here had hit the advancing troops extremely hard and taken a heavy toll on the 10th Essex, who had been forced to retire. In fact, by the time the battalion left the front lines a few days later, they had lost 2 officers and 39 men killed, 11 officers and 282 men wounded, and 45 men missing in action. But what became of Elfie Chamberlain? This article, which appeared in the local newspaper several weeks later, reveals the following. Mr. C. Chamberlain of 54 Gernon Road has received a communication from the War Office that his son, Private E. Chamberlain of the Essex Regiment, has been missing since September 21st. Now began an awful period of uncertainty, with Mrs. Chamberlain, like so many other mothers throughout the war, no doubt waiting each day outside her front door as the postman passed by. No news today. Apparently desperate to hear something, she continued to write to her son in the hopes that just perhaps a letter would reach him at the front. On the 10th of October, she wrote the following.
My dear Elfie, still no letter from you, and Dora has been home today, and she tells me she has not heard from you. Oh, if you do get this letter, do just send a card. If you cannot, then a letter, there's a dear, as it will soon be your birthday, and I shall want to send you a parcel, and it won't be any good if I don't hear anything of you. You'll be 21. It doesn't seem so horrible now, does it? Do let me have a line, there's a dear, to relieve me. All at home, send lots of love, and hope you are well and safe. And most love from your ever-loving mother. C. Chamberlain. P.S. Write if you can.
To no avail. The letter, returned unopened, was simply stamped missing, next of kin notified. The wait continued, until finally, shortly after 11th of November 1918, when the armistice had been signed, news arrived, it being published in the local newspaper several days later. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Chamberlain, an American soldier called Private M. Cosgrove, 267-1449, 106th Infantry, G Company AEF, has just been admitted into this hospital, suffering from a fractured right arm. He was wounded on September 27th, taken prisoner on the same day. About a fortnight after he was admitted into a Belgian hospital, a young soldier named Elphinstone Chamberlain came in with a bullet wound of the left arm, also a prisoner of war. Cosgrove had your address given to him, and he was asked to let you know that Elphinstone was in the Hospital Militaire, Rue de Fer, Namur, Belgium. The sister at the hospital said Elphinstone Chamberlain was not dangerously ill, that he was recovering from his wounds, but that the poison of the wound was affecting his system. He, Cosgrove, said that they were very kind to them in this hospital since the Germans had left. Cosgrove, being unable to write, is anxious that I should send this information on to you. Incredibly, after weeks of no news, finally, Mrs. Chamberlain learned that her son was alive. Knowing now that Elfie was in hospital in Namur, a town which was well behind the German lines until the end of the war, it seems clear that he, last seen on the 21st of September, must have been wounded and captured that day along with several other men of his battalion, and then transported back to a German field hospital for treatment as a wounded prisoner of war. Here he stayed until the war finally came to an end and the Germans simply withdrew, leaving behind many wounded prisoners to look after themselves as best they could. We know this thanks largely to a unique set of wartime correspondence, preserved for a century, between Mrs. Chamberlain and a Madame Delay, who, in her charming but imperfect English, wrote to Elfie's mother, explaining just how she first met her son, which in part reads,
I saw your dear son about the 15th of November, perhaps the 20th, the first time he was with a group of prisoners on the street. The day was very cold. He pleased me immediately, and I asked my husband to take him. He answers me he will, but it is impossible to take him alone and not the others. When we were finished talking, they were gone. Perhaps an hour later he entered my shop to ask for a cheap watch. He was alone. I thanked God who had sent him to us. Directly we pleased each other. He told me he was 21 years old on the next Sunday, and I decided that we should have a little family feast for his birthday. He was first a little shy to accept, but it was only a moment. I gave him a few clothes, he had so little, and it was so very cold. When he went, we were friends. He continued to come every day to dinner and to stay with us until the evening. He slept in the hospital on account of his arm. He brought with him his friend Michael Cosgrove, who certainly will write to you. We passed very good hours together. Your dear son was very gay and very pleased with us. He spoke to me of you, his father, sister, and his brother, who is 14 years old.
By turning to the modern map of Namur and examining Mrs. Delay's letter, on the rear of which gives the address 8 Rue de Bruxelles, Namur, we can turn the clock back and explore the Belgian city. Moving into ground level, we find this exact building, a former jewellery shop once owned by Madame Delay. In fact, it was through this very doorway on the 15th of November 1918 that a cold and wounded Elphinstone Chamberlain met Madame Delay for the very first time. Back in a now peacetime Britain, Mr. and Mrs. Chamberlain, clearly delighted at the prospect of seeing their son again, still anxiously awaited news of his return. When it did finally arrive, it was not news from Elfie, but rather this utterly tragic communication from Madame Delay.
I hope, dear madam, you will pardon me for keeping you so long before I answer your letters. I got the first on the 16th, the second on the 23rd of December. I was in Paris for a fortnight. I am just come back. How sorry I am that your first letter is coming so late. I wrote you every day a little card in the end of November, when he became ill, and never I received an answer. It is so long to come.
She continues.
When he became ill, the doctor decided that he came out. He had a fever which was stronger every day. He was fed with eggs, cream, milk, wine, all strong things. After 4 days, the fever was over. All was quite well, but he got always weaker. The doctors had hope until the last days. I was near him every afternoon or evening. He always asked me if his mother would soon come, if I had written to you. He spoke very much of you, and I saw he must be a loved child, and I was very sad I never could bring him a letter from you. On the Friday, he suffered much. He was sad. To console him, I gave him a little handkerchief, and I kissed him, which gave him great pleasure. He knows he was my spoiled child, as I told him. He every day asked me, "Can I go with you tomorrow?" And I promised him every day, "Surely tomorrow, you come home and we shall do a walk all together." On the Saturday was taken this photo that I send you. It is not very well done. On the evening he was very bad. We thought it was all. The Sunday he was very quiet. Then Monday came. He was gay. He sang a little. We thought the worst was over. On the evening he very often fell asleep. And at 10 o'clock he was gone. Quite painlessly. I never could go back to the hospital since I lost him.
Imagining the heartbreak of a family who had lost and then found a son, only to learn after the war was over he was not to come home, is impossible. Adding to the tragedy, that both Madame Delay and Mrs. Chamberlain had been writing to try and reach each other throughout Elfie's illness, the first of those letters arrived shortly after his death. A few days later, this note, sent to the family by the commander of No. 48 Casualty Clearing Station, then in Namur, appeared in the newspaper. Dear Mrs. Chamberlain, I believe the Belgian lady who showed such great kindness to your son has written to you by the post today. I laid your boy to rest in the Belgrade cemetery, just outside Namur. It will be looked after by the lady, and a cross is being put up. May I offer my sincere sympathy. It seems too hard just now to lose one's near and dear ones, when the fighting is over and so many looking forward to having their loved ones back in their midst again. Bonded by grief, Mrs. Chamberlain and Madame Delay would continue their dialogue in the coming months, and Madame Delay would keep her promise, erecting a cross over Elfie's grave, which she would regularly tend, sending this powerful photograph back to Britain, and a grateful mother. Over the weeks and months, the two mothers became firm friends, and a little under a year after Elphinstone's death, they would meet in person, as Cissy Chamberlain travelled to Belgium and the pair visited Elfie's grave together. Their connection endured, and in the years to follow more correspondence passed between Belgium and Britain, with this letter, written in November 1922, being the last preserved of that powerful story.
Dear Madame, such a long time I have not given you some news from Belgium, but they are so rare. All is quiet and not easy as it is everywhere. We were twice at your son's grave, and we will go on the 2nd December again. For spring, I hope I shall paint the cross, because it ought to be painted. You know the rain has changed the color, and if you like it, we will do it in white instead of black. The name is well on little iron cards. It is very clean. I hope, dear Madame, you are all right. I was not well last month. You know I'm tired and have always much work to do. With the best wishes for yourself and your family, I am yours sincerely, M. Delay.
Ordinarily, that tragic story of loss, one of many in the closing days of the Great War, would come to an end. But not in this case. These documents and Elfie's story actually came to light when working on the Hearts at War project. I met the family of Elphinstone Chamberlain in 2015, who shared their incredible collection in search of more information on their loved one. Touched by the power of the story, we decided to try and find out more, especially about the incredible kindness shown to a young man by a stranger in a foreign country. Contacting the local newspaper in Namur, they agreed to help and published this article appealing for news of the Delay family and what had become of them since the war. 1 week later, I received this email.
It was with emotion that we read the story which appeared in our local newspaper. We think that Mrs. Delay is the grandmother of my husband Jacques Deveau, son of Luce Delay, born in 1912, and youngest of the family behind Betty and André. Marie and Jules ran a jewelry store on Rue de Bruxelles. I cannot provide you with any further information at this time, but I contacted a few family members and we are looking for photos and maybe a few more testimonies. Looking forward to hearing from you, I send you all our Namur friendships on behalf of the whole family.
Attached was this, a photograph of Madame Marie Delay, whose humanity, at a time when it was so rare to find, stands out even a century later. The final act of the Elphinstone Chamberlain story came in September 2018, 100 years since those events, when Elphinstone's granddaughter and great-granddaughter, like their ancestor before them, also made the journey to Namur, to be greeted at Elfie's grave by the granddaughter of Madame Delay. Thanks for watching. We hope you found it interesting. If you enjoy content like this, why not check out our podcast, Not So Quiet on the Western Front, where each week Dr. Spencer Jones and I explore many of the fascinating and untold episodes of the war on the Western Front. That's all this time. We'll see you again soon.